If you ever hear breathing outside your cabin walls at night, don't look out the window. That's the one thing I wish someone had told me before that winter. It's the sound that gets you first, not loud, not snarling. Just breathing. Slow. A rhythm you don't recognize, too heavy for wind, too human for any beast. I know that sound better than I want to. I'm not telling this story for fame or clicks. I'm telling it because someone needs to hear it the way I did. Too late, with frost crawling up the cabin glass and a friend laughing in the dark, thinking it was all just a story. It was early December, the kind of cold that turns every breath into a ghost. The sky above Lake Superior looked like cracked iron, the kind of gray that never brightens, no matter what time it is. I'd gone up with Caleb, my oldest friend, the kind of man who could fix a truck engine with duct tape and prayer, but who thought the old woods legends were a waste of whiskey. The cabin was an old trapper's place, half-rotted and leaning against the wind, 3 miles from the nearest logging road. We'd picked it because it was cheap, isolated, and surrounded by good hunting ground. Back then, we thought silence was peace. Now, I know silence can mean something's listening. That first night, we built a fire and drank until our hands stopped shaking. The forest outside was black, solid as a wall. Every so often, you'd hear a crack somewhere far off, maybe a falling branch, maybe not. Caleb kept grinning at me over his tin cup. "You really buy into all that Dogman crap, don't you?" he said. "I don't buy into it," I told him. "But I've heard enough stories not to laugh." He smirked. "You're turning into one of those YouTube guys, Cryptid Hunter of the North. Next thing you'll say it can talk." I didn't answer. I just listened, to the way the wind shifted through the pines, to the way something deep in me felt off balance. Later, when the fire sank low, I stepped outside to take a leak. The snow was falling lightly, whispering against the hood of my coat. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, spilling just enough light to paint the tree trunks in silver lines. It was beautiful and wrong all at once. Too still, too cold. That's when I caught it, the faintest sound under the hush of falling snow. Breathing. Slow, deep, steady. Coming from the tree line. I froze. Tried to convince myself it was an echo, my own exhale bouncing off the cabin wall. But then it came again. Longer this time. Wet. Heavy. "Hey," I called softly. "Caleb." No answer. The cabin door creaked behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin as he stuck his head out, laughing. "Jesus, man, you look like you saw a ghost." Thought I heard something. Probably a deer. Or your conscience catching up. He went back inside. I waited a long moment before I followed, but the sound didn't repeat. Maybe it didn't need to. It had already planted itself somewhere behind my ribs. We spent the rest of the evening half joking about the legends. The Dogman, they called it. Some said it was a government experiment that escaped decades ago. Others swore it was ancient, older than the tribes, older than the trees themselves. A creature that walked on 2 legs but hunted like a wolf. I told Caleb that old trappers used to carve crosses into their doorframes before winter hit. He rolled his eyes. "You ever notice how the ones who tell those stories never have proof?" he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Because the ones who got proof didn't live long enough to show it." He laughed again, but there was less sound in it this time. Maybe because the wind outside had stopped completely. The kind of stop that means something is holding its breath. Sometime around midnight, I woke to a noise. Not breathing this time, something softer. The sound of wood shifting. At first I thought it was the fire popping, but when I looked over, the coals were dead. The cabin was cold and black, except for a sliver of moonlight leaking through the window. The sound came again. A slow, deliberate creak, like weight shifting on the porch boards. I sat up, careful not to make a sound. Caleb was snoring lightly on the cot across the room. The noise came again, closer now. Then another, heavier. Someone or something was walking just outside the door. I reached for my rifle by instinct, but my hands were shaking. The air smelled strange, like wet soil and rust. The doorknob rattled once. Then silence. I wanted to call out to Caleb, but I couldn't find my voice. I just waited. Minutes crawled by. The only sound was my heart pounding in my ears. Then, faintly, under the floorboards, A low growl rolled through the cabin like a tremor. It was so deep I felt it more than heard it. That's when Caleb stirred. "You hear that?" he mumbled. "Don't move," I whispered. "What the hell is it?" "I don't know." "Don't." The knock came then. 3 heavy blows against the wood. Not fists. Not quite claws either. Just weight, deliberate and slow. Boom. 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 Caleb sat up, his eyes wide. "Bear." No bear knocks like that. We stared at the door. The silence after those knocks was worse than the sound itself. Then, from outside, something exhaled, a long, low breath that fogged the gap at the bottom of the door. Caleb whispered, "We should look." I grabbed his arm. "Don't." He hesitated, torn between fear and pride. "If it's a person, then they can speak," I said. "And whatever's out there hasn't." He didn't listen. He stood up and stepped toward the window. I wanted to shout, but the air felt thick, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. Caleb lifted the curtain an inch. The boards under him creaked. Then everything went still. No wind. No breathing. Just that stretched silence. He let the curtain drop and looked back at me. "I didn't see anything," he whispered. But his face told me he had. We sat up the rest of the night with the rifles across our knees, listening to the forest shift and sigh. Sometimes there'd be a scrape against the outer wall. Sometimes a faint patter, like footsteps circling the cabin. Just when you'd think it was gone, the quiet would twist into something colder, as if whatever was out there was waiting for you to forget. Dawn came pale and thin, and we both laughed it off. 2 grown men, spooked by noises in the night. Caleb even mimed the knocks, saying, "Maybe Santa's early." But when I went outside, I found something that stopped the laughter. Tracks. Not quite human, not quite animal. Deep impressions in the snow, ending just at the porch step. Each print had 5 long marks extending out, almost like fingers, each tipped with a gouge. And they were wide, too wide for any boot. Caleb looked down at them and said, "Could be a prank." 3 miles from a road? I asked. "Maybe a big wolf." "Then where's the tail drag?" He didn't answer. The air felt heavier that morning, the kind of pressure you get before a storm. Even the birds were gone. We packed our rifles tighter, stoked the fire higher, and tried to keep busy. But the forest didn't sound like it used to. It had gone hollow. By nightfall, we were jumpy. Every flicker of flame threw shadows across the cabin walls that seemed to move a heartbeat too slow. Caleb poured another drink. "You know what, man," he said. "You're letting stories get into your head. There's no Dogman. There's just cold and bears and imagination." He said it like a man trying to convince himself. Outside, something howled. Not the high-pitched cry of a coyote, not the long, mournful call of a wolf. This sound was lower, richer, like a man and a beast howling together through one throat. Morning broke like a gray bruise across the horizon, pale light creeping through the frost-covered window panes. The fire had died down to embers, and my breath hung in the air like smoke. Caleb was already up, boots crunching near the door as he muttered to himself. He was staring at something outside, one hand shielding his eyes from the glare. "Tracks," he said when I joined him. "Big ones." The snow was clean, untouched except for a line of depressions leading away from the porch. Each print was deep, sharp-edged, and spaced too far apart for any wolf or bear. I knelt beside one, brushing away the powder. It wasn't round like a paw, more like a distorted human foot, long and narrow, with claw marks sunk deep into the ice. Caleb chuckled under his breath. "Guess Paul Bunyan's dog came through here." I didn't answer. I ran my glove over the print again, tracing the unnatural curve of it. The snow around it had melted slightly, as if something hot had passed through. He straightened and clapped my shoulder. "Man, relax. You said yourself these woods are full of legends. Probably just a wolf with bad feet." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the forest didn't feel right. The air carried a faint stench of rot, like meat left out too long, mixed with the musk of wet fur. It clung to the wind, thick and sour. When the breeze shifted, it seemed to move with us, like the smell itself was watching. We followed the tracks for a while, maybe 50 yards past the clearing. They wound between the pines, circling, doubling back. At one point, the trail went straight up a ridge, so steep even a bear would have struggled. And halfway up, gouged into the bark of a spruce, were 5 long scratches. So high I had to tilt my head back to see them. Caleb stared up at the marks, then grinned. Big cat. Gotta be. In Michigan? I said quietly. He shrugged. Maybe they migrated. When we returned to the cabin, I could tell the silence bothered him too, even if he wouldn't admit it. The woods were never that quiet in winter. No ravens, no squirrels, not even the crackle of branches in the cold. Just the wind threading through the trees, and that faint hum you only notice when everything living has gone still. By afternoon, the snow began again. Fat flakes drifted sideways in the wind, and the world turned colorless. Caleb busied himself patching the cabin's back window, but every few minutes he'd stop and glance toward the trees, his hammer hanging loose in his hand. You ever think maybe we should head back to town? I asked finally. He snorted. Over some weird tracks? You're letting the stories get to you. Maybe. But Earl was right. Things hunt different up here. Caleb rolled his eyes. Earl's 70 and drinks antifreeze for breakfast. You can't take ghost stories from that man seriously. He said it with his usual humor, but his tone lacked conviction. As night approached, the temperature dropped hard. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and the sky turned the color of slate. I kept feeding the fire, watching sparks vanish into the dark chimney. When dusk finally bled into night, we locked the door and settled in. The air inside smelled faintly of smoke and pine tar, but underneath it lingered that other scent again. Decay and wet fur, faint but unmistakable. Around 8, the generator stuttered and died. The cabin fell into shadow except for the firelight flickering across the floorboards. Caleb swore under his breath and went to check the fuse. I stayed near the window, listening. That's when I heard it, distant at first, like someone dragging a heavy log through the snow. Then another sound followed, a rhythmic crunch, deliberate and slow. Caleb, I whispered. He stopped tinkering and looked up. The footsteps continued, circling wide around the cabin. Each step sank deep, crunching through the crusted snow. They paused behind the wall, then resumed, closer this time. Probably a moose, he said, his voice lower than usual. Then why is it walking on 2 legs? He froze. The sound stopped. For a few heartbeats, there was nothing but the pop of the fire. Then came a new noise, soft scraping, wood against wood. Something dragging along the outer wall, nails or claws tracing a slow path. The cabin trembled under a heavy thump, and a dusting of snow fell from the rafters. Caleb moved to the curtain, his face pale in the firelight. Maybe we should. The sound cut him off, a growl, low and vibrating, like the earth itself was groaning. It rolled through the logs, through our bones. My ears rang with it. He swallowed hard. That's not a bear. The fire flickered, shrinking as if afraid of its own light. Another set of footsteps, slower now, pressed against the porch. The boards creaked one by one. Something enormous was standing on the other side of the door. I motioned for Caleb to stay quiet, but he kept glancing at the window. He couldn't help himself. Curiosity stronger than fear. The smell was stronger now, a stench of copper and rot. Then, with a sudden jolt, something slammed into the wall. Once. Twice. The whole cabin shuddered. I raised the rifle, barrel pointed toward the door. My hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. Maybe it's a person, he whispered. Then they'd say something. The thing outside took another step. The porch groaned under its weight. We could hear, breathing, slow, wet animal. The doorknob turned halfway and stopped. Caleb looked at me, his face pale and mouthed, "What do we do?" Before I could answer, the sound came, 3 knocks. Heavy, measured. Boom, boom, boom. Each strike vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the dishes on the shelf. We didn't move. Neither of us even breathed. After a moment, the knocking stopped. A silence, so deep it felt alive, filled the cabin. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Then, faintly, from somewhere near the window, came the crunch of snow retreating. Footsteps moving away, slow and steady. Caleb exhaled shakily and laughed under his breath. Guess we scared it off. Scared it. I whispered. That thing wasn't scared. He went to the window, anyway. I just want to see what direction it went. Don't. But he didn't listen. He pulled back the curtain an inch. The firelight flickered across his face, draining the color from it. His eyes widened, his breath hitched. He didn't speak. Didn't blink. Caleb. I hissed. He finally turned, his lips trembling. That's not an animal, he whispered. Outside, something stood beyond the tree-line, taller than the porch beam, broad as a doorway. The faint outline of a head with pointed ears, shoulders hunched, breath steaming into the night air. It shifted once, and the snow beneath it groaned. Then it moved backward, slow and deliberate, fading into the trees until only darkness remained. The forest was still again. Too still. Caleb dropped the curtain and backed away from the window. We have to leave tomorrow, he said quietly. Yeah, I murmured. If tomorrow comes. Neither of us spoke again that night. The fire burned low, and the smell of rot seeped back in through the cracks, faint but steady, as if whatever was out there had left a piece of itself behind. I didn't sleep. Every so often, I thought I heard something far off in the woods, a single crunch of snow, a breath caught between trees, a sound too human to be nature. Each time I told myself it was my imagination. But deep down, I already knew better. Something had found us, and it was waiting for dark to fall again.